Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today at your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the big issue today of pretending and inventing the idea or the notion that black people all over the world were, irrespective of whether they were Stone Age hunter-gatherers, were in fact technically just as advanced, if not more advanced, than white people. And this is sort of the measuring stick here is the early phases, if you like, of the Industrial Revolution, which is when, because with the Industrial Age, the Europeans were in a position to engage in exploration of areas that were otherwise difficult to get to. The interior of Africa, for example, long ocean voyages to places like Australia and New Zealand and so on. And this was specifically a domain of peoples that had that level of technology. And we had to remember that during the mercantile age, when it kicked off, the long ocean going vessels to cross vast oceans, and the technology in sails and rigging and keels and ship design, in its day, in its time, they were the sort of the rocket ships, the spaceships of their era, technologically. Now, this when the Industrial Age came on, and particularly with things like steam power and that sort of stuff, the Europeans were further able to, get into the interior of Africa and cross into the interior of say the United States. And so things rapidly changed, and there were, as you can imagine, various convulsions given that level of technology and the movement of people around the place. So but the idea is that the Europeans, very advanced technically, came across all these people who were hunter-gatherers, maybe with some minimal sort of, intermittent crop growing and that sort of thing, but effectively hunter-gatherers. And these Stone Age hunter-gatherers who couldn't, they couldn't smelt metals or anything like that at all. And they were Stone Age, and they were hunter-gatherers, and they were semi-nomadic or fully nomadic, and they meet these people who have settlements, vast agricultural areas or vast areas under cultivation, completely different lifestyle and completely different levels of technology. So you get these very advanced technology people, the Europeans meeting people or dealing with and interacting with people from the Stone Age. Now, the separation between the Europeans and the Stone Age people was more than 10,000 years of human development, So the Europeans are meeting or coming across peoples that don't even have the wheel, let alone smelting metals or anything like that. Now, the Iron Age sort of came along, ballpark 3,000 years before the Europeans started arriving in places like Australia or the interior of Africa. So, or 2,500, between 2,500 and 3,000 years. And this made a huge difference to, you can imagine a situation where you're coming across a people who have no wheel. They haven't even invented the wheel yet. They've got no planted crops. Some of them may be running cattle, but again, in a nomadic sense. And they're technologically, at the very least, they're pre-Bronze Age. So again, you're getting on for 10,000 plus years of 8 to 10,000 years of technical difference. So of course that's going to mean that the very advanced civilization supplants the very old, technically the very old civilization. We also have to sort of remember that given they had no Stone Age peoples, they had no urban centres, as it were, and they had no sort of large areas of crops under cultivation and so on, that their population was widely dispersed. And in Australia, as an example, there's in the entire continent of Australia, including the offshore islands and so on, there were fewer of the indigenous Stone Age people then than there are now. So that'll give you an idea as to even a sort of a medium small size city in Australia today has a greater population than the entire population of the continent back in the day. And it's also tribally broken up, so that if you travelled more than a few hundred miles in any direction, the language used was barely the same. Given the different pronunciations, you'd struggle to one tribe would struggle to understand another. They had no written language and so on. So the stories were told through fables, which you can imagine sort of got taller and more imaginative with the telling over generations. Now the woke and the lefties and all funded by the globalists, by the way. The globalists are funding all of this. They're very much of the view that, well, if we accept or if it's allowed to continue the fact that this was a Stone Age people interacting with advanced people with advanced technology, the white folks, this makes the black people, the Stone Age people, makes them appear inferior in every respect, and we can't have that. We have to rewrite the history so they all look equal, which is something going on very much around the place. You see it, say, in the history, how they're rewriting the history of the British Isles at the moment, that really, black people invented everything from the water wheel to the spaceship and so on, and were every bit the equal, as well as being morally superior to all these evil white fascist Nazis. So they're trying to rewrite history and say, well, black people were always in Britain, always prominent, always holding important roles, always at the forefront of technology, always and so on, which of course is an outrageous and grotesque untruth, but the globalist funded groups are pushing this very hard. Wherever you see people pushing mass migration, then they are pushing these lies. The two are together. The lies and the mass migration, they're just part of the same mass deception. So this is happening in Australia as well. So there's this guy wrote a fucking book which became a bestseller. God knows how. He was heavily promoted by the globalists and the NGOs and the globalist media, heavily promoted it, absolutely promoted. And I went to we're at a lunch where there was a lot of legal people there, barristers, judges, that sort of thing. And interesting, barristers and judges often have very activist wives because the barrister or the judge makes a lot of money. The wives can sit around hanging out with arty-farty people who say that all white people are Nazis and that sort of stuff. So you get a lot of activist wives, and there's this book claiming that the indigenous Stone Age people of Australia were in fact every bit as advanced, if not more, than the white people. Fuck. That this book, that again a bestseller, this book is on all of their shelves, and they talk about it like it's gospel. And reciting alleged facts that are clearly nonsense. So I'll just talk a little bit about that. Now, the claim in this book is that the indigenous people lived in towns of 1,000+ people. They were farmers having large areas under cultivation, and they had very advanced methods of catching fish and building houses and this sort of thing. These were an advanced fucking people. And it's only the duplicitous, evil, fascist Nazi white folks came along that supplanted and displaced these very advanced technically. So hold on, wait, stop. What are the signs of an advanced civilization? I mean, you could say, well, it doesn't have to be the steam engine. It could be something else. Okay, all right, I accept that. So the signs of advanced civilization are things like the wheel, and a written language, and urban capability of putting together an urban population. These things are indeed, signs, indications of an advancing civilization. Use of metal, and the list goes on. But we can do some basic ones. The wheel and a written language would surely have to be sort of basics, building blocks of an advanced society, or the beginnings of an advanced society. But the Stone Age people of Australia had none of that. So we're talking about the most basic Stone Age type. So they're at the very early sort of curve. If you look at the Stone Age as a curve, they're even at the early stages of the Stone Age, let alone advanced Stone Age. So this is this book claimed that there was an etching or a painting of some sort that was from the sometime around the 1830s in Australia, where it showed two Indigenous women who were digging for like a sweet potato, I suppose would be the nearest equivalent. A sweet potato that grows wild all over Australia. So they were digging in the ground. There's two of them there digging it out. So this was then used to say, well, you see what they were really doing. It wasn't just wild sweet potatoes they were digging out of the ground. This is proof that they had extensive cultivation to support large towns. But as in a rural sort of setting, 1,000 odd people is a decent sized town. So they had advanced cultivation techniques, every bit as advanced as the Europeans of the day. And this is proof of it. These two women digging wild sweet potato in the ground. That is proof of mass agricultural or large agricultural pursuits and skills, and by extension, that is therefore proof of towns. So now let's look at that. That's a tough gig to sort of argue. That is the flimsiest of flimsy evidence. I mean, we could say, let's say the North American Indians and their teepees, their wigwams, those pointed at the top tents that they had. Well, really, that shows that they were travelers to outer space, because those wigwams, they look like rockets, and they are rockets. So they were very technically advanced, and they used to go into outer space, and that's the proof. And you got a problem with that, you fucking fascist, white supremacist Nazi. So you could use that the flimsy argument. Well, there's the proof. So and you could use that sort of ridiculous argument with with anything. Again, it's so ridiculous that you look at what. So other arguments they sort of put forward. There was allegedly a series of rocks in a pond or a river or stream, and this was claimed to be a piece of extremely advanced technology to trap fish, which just shows that these Stone Age people actually weren't really Stone Age at all. They were using advanced technology, engineering, civil engineering. That they make the people who built the pyramids look like pussies. This is advanced engineering, catching fish in a pond. Now, whether or not that was natural or was put together or what, but it was picking up rocks and piling on each other is advanced civil engineering. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. But that's another sort of thing. And they use these very vague things and using the assertion technique. We all know that evil white people diminish and dismiss the advanced capabilities of these black people because they want to put them down, hold them down. So they just write it out of the history. But really, these people were very advanced, and we're discovering that now because we're fighting back against Hitler. That's what we're fighting back against Nazis and showing how clever these people were. And so they're using the assertion technique. Well, they've always been advanced. It was only the Nazis that stopped them, and we're fighting the Nazis, so we're good. And so this assertion thing, we all know that the white people suppressed the black people. We all know that we all know it. We all know it. Therefore, if you have to agree with what we're talking about now, and that makes you a good person. So they came up with another one where there were some tree branches that were put together or had landed together and this was supposed to be proof of large-scale building of permanent or semi-permanent huts and houses and shelters, which therefore was then used to say, well, that's proof that there were large towns, or 1,000+ people in a town. So that proves it. Now, there's no evidence at all that any of these things are true, but they're using again the assertion method to say that it was, and they found sort of indigenous, like rock paintings in caves or something like that, which they're arguing quite a stretch that it's a painting of the stars. Now, okay, all right, then say it's a painting of the stars. The night sky in Australia at the time, or even today, is very bright with stars. So, okay, look up and see the stars, and somebody does a painting of it. That's fine. But no, does it mean that somebody just did a painting of the stars? No, it means advanced astronomy, not just astronomy, but advanced astronomy, more advanced than any other peoples around the place. This is fucking advanced. This is mathematics of the highest order. So these are the sort of things they're putting about. Now, what you might say is that this is, who would believe this? But it's being pushed heavily in schools and universities. It's become an ideological thing that facts don't really matter. And I'll do another couple of videos on this, but I've noticed, over the last sort of several years, I've been asked by some students and even parents of students, college-age students, to help the student review their thesis or an essay they're doing for their course in international studies or whatever. And something I felt political science, something I've noticed that's continuous is that increasingly the facts don't matter. Getting facts wrong isn't important. To me, if you're going to do this sort of research work and it's got historical element, or you're using historical arguments to support your thesis, then it has to be accurate. Otherwise, what's the point? And I don't mean minor inaccuracies like they say it happened in 1510, but really happened in 1509 or something. That doesn't matter. I'm talking about huge errors that completely undermine their own arguments. So, but I'm surprised how many of these students, even though the paper is littered with errors, as in accuracy, and wide of the mark, not close, that I suggest, well, look, these are the corrections you need to make. But they're not interested in that. The students will shrug their shoulders. Well, that doesn't matter. You're talking facts. Who cares about facts? It just doesn't matter. What matters is the ideology. And, I'm consistent with the prevailing ideology, and that's okay. And that's what's important here. The facts really don't matter. If I say Karl Marx was born in the year 1200 AD, or Karl Marx was walking arm in arm with Jesus Christ, or say that's okay, so it's wrong, but who cares? Because I'm using that to justify an ideology. So any lie I tell or incorrect fact that I assert in support of the ideology is acceptable because I'm supporting the ideology with the lie. So the lie becomes acceptable because the ideology is being supported. And this is how it works. So we're seeing this in of course, this retelling of history, that really doesn't matter if you're telling lies, or it doesn't matter if you've got, you're factually incorrect and factually wide of the mark. It doesn't even matter if you purposefully tell these lies and purposefully put inaccuracies into your in a thesis or an essay or whatever, because the reality is that you're supporting the ideology and that's acceptable. So I'm surprised that the book, even though it's been debunked this book saying that the original inhabitants of Australia were, even though they're a Stone Age people, the argument that they really were very advanced. They weren't hunter-gatherers. They were advanced mathematicians. They were fucking rocket scientists, a bit like the rocket scientists and engineers that all seem to come from these third world countries into the West. But this is the argument they're trying to put forward. But it was widely accepted, and it was trumpeted from the NGO control, the NGOs, the globalist controlled media. They absolutely trumpeted this. And the guy who wrote the book, who was fake in just about every respect, has been richly rewarded for producing this. Let's call it what it is: producing this propaganda. And the propaganda has been gleefully taken up by the chattering classes and the commentariat generally. Now, there have been a few people who've done very scholarly dissections of the work and just proved that it was all nonsense. Absolutely a load of nonsense. Not a grain or element of truth in any of it, any of these claims. They were a Stone Age hunter-gatherer people that didn't even have a common language, had no written language, didn't have the wheel, and were at the early stages of the Stone Age. Now, bear in mind that it's supposedly, at least, these people had been in Australia for, it's a wide variance here between 20,000 and 60,000 years ago. And they arrived from what today is southern India, when there was a land bridge across from southern India through to Indonesia, New Guinea, and through into the northern tip of Australia. They arrived through that land bridge, and then when the sea level rose, the land bridge was gone. But they were definitely a Stone Age people, and they'd been on the continent for at least 20,000 years and hadn't developed at all from their original 20,000 years. So they was, again, that there'd been no technological development in 20,000 years. Now, there's some people point that, well, actually there was technology. They developed the boomerang, or they developed the throwing stick, or they developed using kangaroo skins as clothing, or they had a very basic sort of canoes to go out into, made of bark, to go out into lagoons and just offshore to do fishing, things like that. Then that was supposed to illustrate advanced technology. Well, no, it didn't, and it's absurd to claim it does. But it was widely received and gleefully received again by the globalist-funded commentariat, and all those that were debunking it very concisely in a very scholarly manner. Where, of course, typically, they're Nazis, they're Hitler, and the mainstream media just plain didn't report it. The globalist controlled media and the NGOs just didn't report it. And the books, whereas this book was made mandatory reading in high schools all across the country, the books debunking it were not allowed in those same schools and libraries, which goes to show you the effort that was put into protecting the narrative. So we need to understand that it's the narrative, and the ideology will be protected at all costs. And any lie, any untruth, no matter how grotesque, will be warmly received and defended and protected, as long as it's in pursuit of the narrative and the ideology. Been a Tassos today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.